management we have in Barbados. I have a number of suggestions to get us out of this mess, I think, or I think that we ought to be talking about. But I'll talk about two briefly. I think, and some of the suggestions are, I think we should set up a national wealth fund. I think that that's, or sovereign wealth fund, if you want to call it that. I think that that's quite important, and I think that that's driving global growth now, mainly coming out of China, Japan, Singapore in particular, and so on. And I think that we can do that. And all we can do it at minimum cost is roll a number of existing departments and sectors and statutory bodies into a single body, independent of government, because I think that's the big bane of Barbados. Ministers interfering, ministers want to run the day-to-day affairs of these corporations and so on. And I think we've got to set up something that's totally independent of ministers. I think we need a compulsory long-term savings plan, and I think that that's the example we can get from Singapore with the Provident Fund. I think that when De Barbados was Prime Minister, one of the very first things he did shortly after independence in '66 was to go to Singapore and to return to Barbados, saying how much he loves Singapore and so on. We may not like Lee Kuan Yew's authoritarianism and so on, but the reality is that the Provident Fund, was the driver of Singaporean development. And to this day, Singapore is amongst the 2 or 3 leading developed nations in the world. And that's not impossible. Remember, Singapore got its independence in 1965. It was a swamp land. Not even Malaysia wanted Singapore. The only people who went to Singapore were the British Army to carry out their guerrilla training, because we were still in those days and so on. Barbados got its independence the year after, and at that time Barbados was still, not to the extent that it used to be, as Richard would tell you much better than I can, but it was still one of the jewels in the crown. There was still the belief that Barbados was a nice little island and so on. We have declined since then, radically, while Singapore has grown. The thing we talk about, or education, and the standard of education, and the nonsense about 99% literacy. Let's take an example. Since the creation of the Caribbean Examination Board, every year it announces the school of the year. This is the school that has done best throughout the CXC region in the exams. And never once has a single Barbadian school been school of the year in the CXC exams. Not a Harrison College, and my apologies to the Arizonians next to us, not Lodge, not Queen's College, not even Combermere. And so that tells us something about the standard of education in Barbados amongst other Caribbean countries. And the outstanding school, and it shouldn't surprise many of us, has been a St. Lucian school, St. Joseph's. And I'm not surprised that St. Lucia has also produced the only 2 Nobel Prize winners in the English-speaking Caribbean. This is symptomatic, I think, of the make-believe world we live in and the reality. And the other thing which I think is of tremendous importance, really, is the spend on education in Barbados. Again, I think it's reflective of the lip service we pay to education and the reality. We spend something like 6 point something, nearly 7% of GDP on education. And most of that goes to the great empire that Hilary Beckles is building in Cave Hill, which is totally useless, a waste of public money. And now, within a few years, we'll have lots of Barbadians speaking Chinese and that kind of stuff, and they'll go out into the working world and say, well, we can be translators or something like that. Again, this is a reflection of the lack of a proper, dynamic, educational policy and so on. And I suggest, Mr. Chairman, and I'll try and end this as quickly as possible, that, again, we can have a national educational policy. And I think we should gradually increase our spend on education to something like 12% of GDP, or even higher if we can afford it. But where we should be investing the money is at the bottom end. Nursery schools, infant schools, primary schools, secondary schools. And we should, we should brief the education system, the head teachers, the department and so on, that within 10 years, which would be the compulsory educational period of the ordinary new entrance into school, that we should be able to compete on an international basis. And I think that's quite important. I think that if we do that, and the way to do it, I think, is to up the status of teachers, turn teaching into a postgraduate profession, provide them with the training and so on, provide the heads with the training, make the heads the chief executives, if you like, of the school. Let the schools be under the control of the constituency councils, not under some interfering manager or some underworked civil servant and so on as we have at present. And I think that that would feed through eventually into quality students. That would really be, you know, world class and not the imaginary world class that we have at present. And I think we should also become a bilingual nation. I mean, we live in the biggest Spanish-speaking region in the world, and outside a few people who've been fortunate enough to be trained, you know, or to be taught Spanish or whatever, you know, very few of us, you know, manage even to speak Bayesian for anything else. And that's where we can spend our money again. Mr. Chairman, I'll end with my great suggestion from the diaspora. I think that we should have a diaspora fund, call it a heritage development fund. And I think that it's nothing new. Israel has one. The Greeks have now established one because of their you know, profligacy and so on. And I think that we can do that. I think that there's no reason why we can get 50,000 Barbadians. Richard was just talking about the great escape, those people leaving Barbados to go to Cuba and Curacao and Brazil, Panama, the United States, Canada, Britain. We can get 50,000 people. Invest in what, 3,000 Barbados, 3,000 pounds, which is about 10,000 Barbados dollars, giving us a fund of about £500 million to spend specifically on investing in small and medium enterprises and in small niche manufacturing firms and so on. It could be of two, and I don't want to go into the technical details, it could be of either of two styles. It could either be a closed-ended fund, which means basically that once you've met the target, then there wouldn't be any further investments. There would just be people who are in, who want to get out, would then be able to sell, you know, their investments. Or it could be open-ended, which means that it would be a rolling fund, and people, as they feel, can invest and so on. And I think that that would be a tremendous starter of small businesses in Barbados. And we only have to look back, and I'll finish now, Mr. Chairman. We only have to look back at the recent chaos that we're getting in Barbados. You know, the 120 million that David Thompson irresponsibly gave to Four Seasons without any real due diligence, because the project is a white elephant and it's been sold to us as a pig in a bag by a leading economist. And people were so fascinated by the idea that here's a professor telling us that he's chairman, executive chairman of this project and so on. And we're queuing up to pass taxpayers' money on to him. Now we have the National Insurance Scheme saying, well, we wouldn't invest, or we would invest. Then they said, no, we wouldn't invest the £50 million that he's asking for. Then the government, under the big chested Mr. Sinclair and the quiet man as Prime Minister decided, no, go back and review your decision. In other words, we don't like your no, go back and find a reason to say yes. Now what they're doing is taxpayers' money in a project that's not going to work. Tourism in Barbados is a failure. When we had the World Cricket Tournament in Barbados, hotels were only 70%, full. The capacity was under. It's the same thing now. If you drive through Barbados, drive through the south coast, you see hotels for sale, or the buildings that used to be hotels for sale. This is going on. They're telling us, the big supporters of the Four Seasons, that this is a 5-star project. Well, what's wrong with the other 5-star hotels we have in Barbados? Why aren't they over brimming with tourists and so on? They're not. The Sandy Lanes of this world are not packed. The Royal Westmorlands are not packed and so on. It's a vanity project. And I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that the £50 million that they're asking the National Insurance to invest in could be much better invested for the people of Barbados. £50 million can create a post office bank in Barbados, which is what we badly need after the irresponsible selling of the Barbados National Bank by Owen Arthur. The £50 million, we have the infrastructure, 18 post offices geographically distributed throughout the country. They're doing semi-banking already. They're providing a hell of a lot of the services. All we need would be the technology. The technology could be bought off the shelf for a couple £1 million. We need to train people. We can train up people, and we can roll out a national post office bank you know, in a soft launch, if you like. We can start in the country with a post office bank, and then we can build this up and so on. And I suggest, Mr. Chairman, there are two ideas we can work on. I'm quite willing to explore other ideas or even these with you anymore. The reality is that we're being led by a lot of dumbbells, and there's no way back in a globalized world. You know, if we fail to keep up now, it means we're going to be reduced greatly in the years to come. Thank you.
The level of contribution by the diaspora, consider also whether the diaspora should be defined to include dual residents or non-residents with properties or interests in Barbados. Consider also the role that the diaspora can play to help Barbadian entrepreneurs to enter and compete in the 21st century global marketplace. Consider the feasibility of a diaspora bond or fund set up to provide microfinance to entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much, Tara. I'm actually treading a little bit of footwork there with this microphone. This cricket's my game, not football. Thank you very much, Al. I guess, ladies and gentlemen, one of the powerful things about the Barbadian diaspora and its strength is the diversity of views. And I say that in jest with Al, but actually, it's its strength. It has always been that challenging within the diaspora, from externally, from internally. If you look at it, Hal's views that he has exposed here, he actually exposes them very powerfully back in Barbados as well, and they're listened to. They may not agree with them, but they listen to them. That is the power of our diaspora, one which has been built, as Richard has said, going back centuries, built in adversity, built in a global world. And actually, even in these couple of minutes as I think ahead of looking to the future, to actually say that's what our future is going to look like at diaspora. Because the world that we're in today, 2011, in terms of the way the economy is going, it's actually not too far from whether it's 1838 or 1938. In particular, 1938. It was a fracturing, you know, there was war, there was economy breaking down. And I think looking ahead, you know, if we look at us from a diaspora, and we look ahead, there are gloomy bits, okay? The economic challenges here are real. The economic challenges for Barbados are real. You know, we heard about Standard & Poor's downgrading us. But having said that, there's a lot that's positive, a lot that's happening. The global economy is expected to triple by 2050, okay, triple, 3 times the current size. And within that, I think there's some real opportunities and real challenges for Barbados as it develops, where the diaspora will be at the center of it. Where a lot of that growth is going to be is actually in Africa. You know, even last year, 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world were in Africa. Angola, Nigeria, Chad, Rwanda, Mozambique, Ethiopia. I'm saying that from kind of 2 perspectives about how we as individuals and we as a country need to look at it. One, in talking about Africa, we're talking about a very critical part of our heritage as a diaspora, one which we have not fully explored, but it's where the future is going to be. And where I think there are real opportunities, and where I think all of us in here need to look ahead as we think how as societies and as a country we develop. The world is going to be different, you know. It's very interesting, and I think why we as a country and a diaspora need to get it. Very interesting, David Cameron came back and he talked about London needing the energy of Lagos and Mumbai, and that's how we should be looking at the future. Right? And if you think of a conservative prime minister saying that, you know, it's worth reflecting on, because it's saying internationally we have to trade, you know, we have to look at our linkages very differently. And I think, again, looking ahead, as a diaspora, Barbados has a lot of advantages, you know, in being able to leverage those things. One, you know, this adversity, we've been there before, we know how to operate. in challenging circumstances. Two, we are at a good place. I think it's good to be critical of the education system, as Hal has said, but the Barbadian population is still one of the most highly educated populations, and that's developed all by developing standards in a world where education is a distinctive competitive advantage. So that is something that we have to lever. And three, we do have many skilled businessmen, skilled historians, skilled, of professionals in the diaspora at home and globally. Okay, and I think it really is very important in looking ahead that we start leveraging those skills. We learn from the other diaspora communities who've done that very well. If you look at India and China, particularly people talk about the way in which a lot of India's growth has been linked and driven by their relationships of diasporas in India compared to those in Silicon Valley. We ourselves have that ability within us to do that, and I think we need to leverage that. Looking at those opportunities in the global marketplace. From our side here, we, as I said, a lot of these global opportunities, say if it's growing into Africa, if it's growing into Asia, isn't just going to be Barbadians going there. It's Barbadians coming through or linking up with London, linking up with those of us with skills here. And again, another way in which that whole interaction of the diaspora can help drive economic growth in the future. And marketing the skills. If you look at where some of the big gaps are in terms of skills needs globally, it is around education. Whether it's education of black boys in the US or the UK. As a very interesting aside, they've said that the underachievement of minorities in the US through poor education is the equivalent to a permanent recession. So if you just reflect on that a bit, the lost output, from not properly educating minority kids in the US is a permanent recession. Okay, and which country has been better and proven over a significant period of time of educating black kids but Barbados? There's a big opportunity there, a big business opportunity that I think we can lever. And so I think there's much that the diaspora can do. I think there is a lot that we can explore imaginatively to create that, because I think we have to look at the diaspora differently in the future. In the future, the diaspora is not going to look like here. Okay, to be very candid, it's going to be whiter. One of the very significant aspects, sobering aspects, is that people have said that Afro-Caribbean as a category of people, if that's the right way, is going to be very different as we intermarry going forward. That it is the reality that it is. How we look to engage with that kind of a very changing diaspora in the future, one which is most probably younger, is a critical thing. We can duck it or we can address it head on, but I think we have to look and address it head on, because I think it will bring in very different perspectives, but also be a very different way of engaging in the future. What can the diaspora do for Barbados socially? Because I think, and it's one of the really important aspects that Richard touched on, it, the whole interaction of the diaspora is not about just economics. It's about the way in which the diaspora has historically always helped Barbados progress socially. Even with this whole theme of Barbados being more than an economy, but a society, I think that is where some of the very interesting aspects are going to be there in the future. In particular around the development of, say, the philanthropy sector in Barbados, development of social enterprises, in particular when we're going into an era in Barbados where the inevitable cutback in costs is going to put lots of challenges. And I think there are lots of ways that the diaspora here in England and across the world can contribute to that development. There are many other things that I can touch on, but I will maybe finish there. The government can look at aspects around the ministry for the diaspora. They can look at ways sharing information in a much more efficient way with us in the diaspora. I think information sharing isn't as good as it is. I think a recognition more officially through maybe even a special ID status, just as how you have non-resident Indians, and that was a very important part of India's development, maybe a non-resident Barbadian in a much more formal way is another idea that the government could look at. Again, similarly, the High Commission up here looking to engage, more closely along those lines. And I think and I'd like to leave it there. As I said, there's a lot to be done, but what I'd stand back and say is, I think the Barbadian diaspora is one of the most remarkable diasporas around the place. In terms of the proportion that's overseas and its contribution over hundreds of years, it really is remarkable. I think we're facing some of the most challenging times, but some of the most interesting times, and I think Barbados will succeed in the future, and I think it will succeed because of an even stronger engagement with its diaspora. I think its best days are ahead, and I think all of us are going to help contribute to that. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Alan. Alan there in the middle order, temporary, the hostile bowling from Austin. Right. Next one is Vanessa Denny, and her title of her discussion will be The Future, What the Diaspora Can Do, considering the practical steps that diaspora organizations and individuals can take to ensure that the next generation maintains an attachment to Barbados and a desire to continue to contribute to its development.
It's Vanessa Denny, and I'm a child of migration. I have gone to Barbados quite a lot in my life, and today I want to talk about the future of Barbados. When I was asked to do this presentation, I had a lot of opinions, and I was told that I needed evidence, and I can't just say my opinion. So from this conversation with Mr. Tyrone, I've also engaged with quite a lot of young people that live in this country that are from the Barbadian diaspora, or they've actually come from Barbados to study here and have their opinions. I've got two lovely ladies that will also be talking today. They will introduce themselves later. Thank you. My name is Vanessa Denny, and at the front there's Amelia and there's also Sonia. They will talking about respectively about an organisation that I'm proposing to take to Barbados, and also an experience of coming from Barbados and living here as a young person. Okay, so the purpose of today is talking about engagement with the young and Barbadian diaspora, key themes and possible explanations of their reasons and the future. So basically there's an online survey function called SurveyMonkey, and I sent that out to a lot of people that I know that engage with friends and go out and everything, to ask the younger people, first, second and third generation Barbadians, how they feel about Barbados. Do they go to events hosted by people from Barbados? Do they feel a sense of home to Barbados, or a link or connection? Or have they changed and assimilated to become British Barbadians? And basically, I use Facebook, and I use a lot of word of mouth and internet and emails just to kind of push that out there. And I've got over 35 responses so far. And from the last point, you can see 62% of people were between the ages of 26 and 45 years. 57% of them were born in the UK. And a lot of them use word of mouth, Facebook and the internet to find out about events and to manage their social life. And when I say events, I don't just mean going to bars and clubs, but also things like social enterprise, business enterprise, conferences. And also from that, people have called me, so I put my name, my email address and my telephone number at the end of the survey, and they've actually called me just to talk about their experiences on their views. And a lot of people have said that they do want to go back to Barbados and invest in their community and their country, but they don't feel there's any kind of sectors to tap into, because a lot of it they feel is focused around tourism, and historically Barbados has always pushed out the idea of the tourist and not necessarily really invested in their people in London or England. So there is a need, and people do want to go back to Barbados, not just solely for holidays, but to invest in their economy also. Next slide. From the survey, there was 5 main things. A lot of it was about citizenship and the fact of paying for it. As far as people are concerned, as much as it's an admin cost, I'm a citizen of Barbados. A lot of people go back yearly or every 2 years, and a lot of people that I've spoken to also take their children back as well. And they do feel a sense of home, but it's also the fact that without their previous generations, so their mothers, their fathers, their grandparents reinforcing it in themselves, they don't feel that the Commission per se has supported the notion of Barbados. Another thing is the generational gap and lack of identity. Now, the lack of identity was very interesting, and that was basically about that they didn't feel there's anything distinct about Barbados. Things like soca, dominoes, crickets, rum tend to be seen as a globalized West Indian or Caribbean Caribbean thing, not necessarily individual to Barbados. They also think that their country has been marketed very well, and a lot of people see Carnival as Trinidadian, a lot of people see the West Indies as Jamaica, and there's a big gap of actually what is Barbados. And when you go out and the DJ and the MC shouts out who's from Barbados, 1 or 2 lone people might go, yay! But the majority, it's the truth, the majority is from other islands. Also recently I saw a flyer for Soca Nights every Thursday in Stratford, and strangely enough they're celebrating the Guyanese independence, and the next big event as far as they're concerned is a Trinidadian Carnival next year. And I'm like, well, on Wednesday, actually, you know, something very important to some people in this country is happening and it hasn't been mentioned. So people feel that Barbados has been forgotten, or it hasn't been reinforced in popular media, hasn't been reinforced enough within their communities and societies. In terms of generational gap, that's more about assimilation and people coming from Barbados, living here in the 60s and 70s, and over time people have become less Barbadian, more British first and Barbadian second, and it's seen as a home or a beautiful island that they may never ever get to in their life, but it's still got a notion to them. Past focus on tourism, people have a feeling that it's been quite bitter, and that Barbados has focused a lot on investing money in tourists and the fact that they get preferential treatment. And myself going to Barbados, and people quite confused that I speak English with a South London twang, and but I claim that I'm from Barbados and I'm part of that. And the whole kind of tension that you're not really Barbadian, you're just here on holiday and you're like everybody else. And it's a bit like, well, I feel like I have a connection here, but I don't belong here. And then I come to Britain and I have the same thing, that I'm born here, I feel like I have a connection here, but I'm also told that I don't belong here either. What Barbados has to offer, in terms of everybody's comments today, again, a lot of people that were surveyed said they go to Barbados because their family's there, but there's nothing else to do in the island. Compared to the new emerging countries like Brazil, China, Thailand, where there's so many other activities to invest into and a lot of money that you can spend to go there and have that excitement. Barbados is more just seen as home and relaxing. And there's a feel that, you know, to bring more people, to bring the second and third generation back, you need to offer more. And also younger events for young people in this country to kind of create that idea and emotional attachment to home. Amelia is going to come and speak about her experience of coming from Barbados and actually studying here.
Good night, everyone. Thank you. My name is Amelia Haynes, and I came here in September 2009 along with my sister, Rochelle, who's not here tonight, to study. I did a master's degree in international economics at the University of Sussex, and she did a master's in human resource management. She's now doing a PhD in international human resource management at Leicester. Having graduated top of her class, mind you, very proud. My experience coming from Barbados to here, I came and I studied in Brighton, which was a bit of a culture shock when I first came, because I don't know if any of you know much about Brighton, but it's very eclectic, strange. It's the biggest gay capital of England, and you see a lot of strange things every day, to the point where anybody asks, I'm like, sorry, it's Brighton, I don't know what else to tell you. But my experience in Brighton, I haven't met many Barbadians. It took me actually 3 months before I met another Caribbean person. And that was on my campus, and he was from Trinidad, and he introduced me to someone else from the Bahamas, and his barber happened to be Barbadian, and I met another Barbadian in the supermarket who worked at the same barbershop who was a Barbadian, and that was the total, was all the Barbadians I met. Outside of that, the guy from Trinidad then introduced me to a lady from Barbados who worked at the university. And I bumped into one other guy who worked at IDS, Institute of Development Studies at the university, which I see every now and again.